Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 2, Text 17. Translated with commentaries by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So, Chapter 2 is Ajamil's deliverance by the Vishnudutas. In Chapter 1, we heard the arguments by the Yamadutas why Ajamil should be taken to Naraka and the court of Yamaraj for punishment for all the horrendous things that he'd done in his life. And Ajamil was quite sinful, went against all the morality and scripture, and just like an animal, human being living like an animal, basically. Worse than an animal. And the account were there. It was a very, very big account of all the activities. A lot of punishment coming. Reactions. Sinful reactions. And now we're hearing from the Vishnudutas why he can't be taken for punishment. The reason he can't be taken, we're hearing, is that even though his intention wasn't to call out for God, he did call out, because he had named his son Narayana, which is the name of the Lord, which means give shelter to all living entities. Shelter of all living entities, Narayana. Because the name of the Lord is non-different from the Lord, then the Lord's messengers and servants heard the call, heard him calling, Narayan, and they came to the spot. And he can't be taken for punishment because one who calls out for the holy name, especially at the time of death, is freed from all their sinful reactions. And calling out offenselessly. He wasn't trying to take advantage of the holy name of the Lord by doing all nonsense and then calling out. He wasn't doing that. He had no intention of using the holy name like that. He was calling out helplessly. He was calling out to his son, but he was calling out the name of the Lord. So it's a very interesting case to study, and that's why it's discussed so much in the Bhagavatam and in other scriptures, what this shows, because this actually happened. It's not a story. This is actually a case history, what happened. And by studying it, we can understand the super excellence of the Lord's holy name. And another problem is not just that he can't be judged like that, is that he's now considered sinless because he called out the holy names of the Lord helplessly at the time of death. To take such a person into the Yamaraj's court, which is the highest court, everybody goes from, district court, county court, district court, Supreme Court, supposed to be the highest court. Well, no. There's a court that's higher, and it's Yamaraj's court. It's the highest court in creation. And that's where the different crimes are presented, and then the punishments are allocated according to the severity of the crimes, the sins. So to take a sinless person into that court and judge them in the same way they would someone who hadn't called out for the Lord, would ruin the whole justice system, because the highest religious principle is to call out for the Lord. That's the highest religious principle, is to take shelter of the Lord. That's why all the punishments are there. That's why the whole material creation is there, to give an opportunity to a living being to turn to God in helplessness and offenselessly call out for the Lord. So when someone does that, to then look at all the bad things they did and judge them on that would ruin the whole justice system for the entire creation. So the Vishnu Dutas intervened immediately. No, you can't do this. Not only would you be punishing a sinless person who has reached the highest point that's everything's meant for, is to call out for God. He's doing that, so he can't punish him, because that's why everything's set up. That's why the whole material creation is there, to bring a person to that point. So he's reaching that point. You can't take him and punish him for all the other stuff. If you do, you'll just ruin the whole system. Yamaraj's court will become contaminated and just make a huge mess, huge problem. So that's a very interesting point there. So this particular study of Ajamil is very, 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 very interesting. So text 16. These are the Vishnu Dutas now presenting why, the different reasons why Ajamil cannot be judged in the same way that someone who hasn't called out for the Lord in helplessness. So, although one may neutralize the reactions of sinful life through austerity, charity, vows, and other such methods, these pious activities cannot uproot material desires in one's heart. However, if one serves the lotus feet of the personality of Godhead, he's immediately freed from all such contaminations. So this is the point that has been made in many different ways over the last several verses, about how nothing can compare to performing devotional service. Not austerities, not charity, not taking different vows. Although they're pious activities, and they do, to one degree or another, counteract the reactions for any sinful activities that may be performed, they don't get to the root of why someone commits sinful activities, or why one acts fruitively. It doesn't even have to be sinful activities. It could be activities that are recommended in the Karma Kanda section for elevation to higher planets. But it doesn't get to the root of the material desire. Only by surrendering to devotional service, the lotus feet of the Lord, is that root pulled out and become free from the desire to engage on the material platform. It's Prabhupada's commentary. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam, devotional service is so powerful that one who performs devotional service is immediately freed from all sinful desires. All desires within this material world are sinful, because material desires mean sense gratification, which always involves action that is more or less sinful. Just desiring sense gratification is sinful because it keeps one in the material world, birth after birth. So the whole thing is sinful. Anything that brings a karmic involvement in karma can be said to be sinful. It's like, it's very sinful to eat meat and fish and eggs, all these, it's terrible, sinful. But it's also sinful to eat fruits and roots and vegetables, nuts and seeds. That's also sinful. There's also karma involved in eating those kinds of foods. That's why they have to be offered to Krishna and taken as remnants. So anything within the material plane can be said to be sinful. It's just that some sinful activities, some material activities are recommended in the scriptures to bring someone to a point where they can take advantage of good association, devotional service, where they can begin to appreciate the personality of Godhead's position. In other words, by following rules and regulations, it's a kind of surrender, accepting a higher authority. Oh, the rules, following the rules. And at some point, there's the opportunity to inquire or to hear messages from realized souls about whose rules and regulations they are and what the actual goal of it all is. The goal isn't just sense gratification. And then there are activities in the material plane where the rules and regulations are completely disregarded, scripture is completely disregarded, the person just does whatever their senses dictate to them to do. And that's where you get the bad reactions, sinful reactions, because they weren't even able to accept the authority of the scriptures, the rules and regulations. They want sense gratification, but they couldn't even do it couldn't even surrender to following instructions how to do it. And have, say, illicit sex. There's prescription to have nice married life and make advancement with a partner. But going against this, when they go from one partner to another partner trying to satisfy their lusty desires, so there's sinful reaction for that. Bad sinful reaction. So it's never just black or white. There's always a spectrum. So there's a spectrum of severity of the type of material involvement. So on one end of the spectrum is performing all kinds of pious activities and going to the heavenly planets, but there's still no getting out of the material world and going back home, back to Godhead. It's just in the material plane, the spectrum, that's the best thing that one can achieve on the material platform. And then on the other end of the spectrum, the lower end, is performing all kinds of sinful activities to try to satisfy the senses and finding oneself in the court of Yamaraj getting sinful reactions. No heavenly planets for you. Here, try Naraloka, and here's a nice tree covered with thorns. How'd you like to slide down it? So, that's the program. Beyond that, one immediately gets freed from either a reward or a punishment, is transcendental devotional service to the lotus feet of the Lord. I was talking with one person one time, and they said they were hesitating. They didn't know if they really wanted to surrender to Krishna or not, because they might have some good karma coming. Maybe they were going to win the lottery or inherit a fortune, or maybe they were going to get some good karma. And they heard that if you surrender to Krishna, then you're freed from your karma. So they weren't sure they wanted to surrender to Krishna. That's how the material attachment works. That's how the Maya works. So, devotional service is so powerful. The one who performs devotional service is immediately freed from all sinful desires. So by surrendering to the lotus feet of the Lord, then the desire to engage is even on the higher end, go to the heavenly planets. The desire for that is not there. Desire is only to go back home, back to Godhead, to serve Krishna. I don't want anything to do with the material modes of nature. I don't want anything to do with the material body. I want to get that spiritual body. All desires within this material world are sinful because material desires mean sense gratification, which always involves action that is more or less. It's either more sinful or less sinful. Pure bhakti, however, is anyabalasita sunya. In other words, it is free from material desires, which result from karma and jnana. One who is situated in devotional service no longer has material desires. Therefore, he's beyond sinful life. Material desires should be completely stopped. Otherwise, although one's austerities, penances, and charity may free one from sin for the time being, one's desires will reappear because his heart is impure. Thus, he will act sinfully and suffer. Yeah. So externally, performing austerities, penances, giving in charity, they can free one from sin for the time being. But the desires will reappear because the heart is impure. The heart is impure. So that means loving, transcendental, devotional service to the Lord, to Krishna. And that is what purifies the heart. (18) As a fire burns dry grass to ashes, so the holy name of the Lord, whether chanted knowingly or unknowingly, burns to ashes without fail all the reactions of one's sinful activities. We see, we're hearing about how super excellent the holy name of the Lord is. As fire burns dry grass to ashes. Have you ever seen a grass fire? You know how it just goes right through the dry grass, just gobbles it right up, burns it right to ashes. So the holy name of the Lord says, whether chanted knowingly or unknowingly, burns to ashes without fail all the reactions of one's sinful activities. Of course, there's more going on in chanting the holy name than simply getting free from sinful reactions. But that is also happening. And people make such endeavors to try to get free from their sinful reactions with these austerities and these vows and giving in charity, so many things to get free from sinful reactions. And this, whether knowingly or unknowingly, if one chants the holy name, they get free from sinful reactions without fail. Because the Lord is non-different from his name. And the Lord is not deaf, dumb, and indifferent. And call out for the Lord is listening. He's hearing. He hears the call. And he sends help. The Lord is within the heart. By calling out the holy names of the Lord. Because that's the goal of life, is to be able to call out for the Lord sincerely. And that's what Ajamil was doing. Even though he was doing it unknowingly, he was getting freed from all his sinful reactions. Prabhupada's commentary, fire will act. That is the significance of this verse. As fire burns dry grass to ashes, the fire will act. And Prabhupada says, regardless of whether handled by an innocent child or someone well aware of its power. So knowingly or unknowingly, fire burns. For example, if a field of straw or dry grass is set afire, either by an elderly man who knows the power of fire, or by a child who does not, the grass will be burnt to ashes. Similarly, one may or may not know the power of chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, but if one chants the holy name, he will become free from all sinful reactions. This is spiritual energy, the energy of the Lord. Spiritual. And when we say that the holy name of the Lord is non-different from the Lord, that means the source of everything. That means the original fire, Krishna, is there in the holy name. And that will act. Wherever Krishna goes is supremely pure, because Krishna is the supreme pure. So whether the person knows it or not, like whether a child knows the power of fire or not, if you're playing with matches, you're going to burn down something. So this is the fire of the Sankirtan movement. Wherever Krishna goes is supremely pure because he's the supreme pure. Nothing can be contaminated where Krishna is. There can't be any contamination where Krishna is. (19) If a person unaware of the effective potency of a certain medicine takes the medicine or is forced to take it, it will act even without his knowledge, because its potency does not depend on the patient's understanding. Similarly, even though one does not know the value of chanting the holy name of the Lord, if one chants knowingly or unknowingly, the chanting will be very effective. Again, another way to see this, the other verse was about fire, that whether one understands the potency of fire or they don't understand the potency of fire, fire is fire and it will burn. So another example is being given here is that potency of a certain medicine, whether the person understands the potency of the medicine or they don't. The potency does not depend on the patient's understanding. So even though one does not know the value of chanting the holy name of the Lord, if one chants knowingly or unknowingly, the chanting will be very effective. Now this is coming from Bhagavatam, and this is coming from well before 5,000 years ago. So the power of the holy name is not something new. This is not something new. This is being repeated to Maharaj Parikshit 5,000 years ago. But this Bhagavatam is coming from Vyāsadeva. This goes way back. It's not some new thing. Holy name of the Lord. Prabhupada's commentary. In the Western countries, where the Hare Krishna movement is spreading. Learned scholars and other thoughtful men are realizing its effectiveness. For example, Dr. J. Stilson Judah, a learned scholar, has been very much attracted to this movement because he's actually seen it's turning hippies addicted to drugs into pure Vaishnavas who voluntarily become servants of Krishna and humanity. Even a few years ago, such hippies did not know the Hare Krishna mantra, but now they're chanting it, becoming pure Vaishnavas. Thus, they're becoming free from all sinful activities, such as illicit sex, intoxication, meat eating, and gambling. This is a practical proof of the effectiveness of the Hare Krishna movement, which is supported in this verse. One may or may not know the value of chanting Hare Krishna mantra, but if one somehow or other chants it, he will immediately be purified, just as one who takes potent medicine will feel its effects, regardless of whether he takes it knowingly or unknowingly. The potency is there, whether we know it or we don't know it, and it will act. The holy name will act. It's so wonderful. And there's no one more dear to the Lord than someone who spreads his holy name, who helps administer the medicine, knowingly or unknowingly, to people who receive it, knowingly or unknowingly. Because this is not an invention or creation of any conditioned soul. This is Krishna himself. Text 20. Sri Sukadeva Goswami continued, "My dear king, having thus perfectly judged the principles of devotional service with reasoning and arguments, the order carriers of Lord Vishnu pleased the Brahmin Ajamil, released the Brahmin Ajamil from the bondage of the Yamadutas, and saved him from imminent death." So, the judgment that was taking place didn't take place in Yamaraj's court. The judgment of Ajamil took place here, between the Yamadutas and the Vishnudutas. And the judgment was ruled in favor of the Vishnudutas and their argument on the highest principles of devotional service. So Ajamil was released from the Yamadutas, and he also was released from death at that time. Text 21. My dear Parikshit, O subduer of all enemies, after the servants of Yamaraj had been answered by the order carriers of Vishnu, they went to Yamaraj and explained to him everything that happened. They went back empty-handed. In this verse, the word pratyajutita is very significant. The servants of Yamaraj are so powerful, they can never be hindered anywhere. But this time they were baffled and disappointed in their attempt to take away a man they considered sinful. Therefore, they immediately returned to Yamaraj and described to him everything that had happened. Now, they'd never been prohibited from, when they made a decision, they saw someone sinful was there, and they arrested him and brought him to Yamaraj. This had never happened before. Wow. Krishna. Text 22. Having been released from the nooses of Yamaraj's servants, the Brahmin Ajamil, now free from fear, came to his senses and immediately offered obeisances to the Vishnudutas, bowing his head at their lotus feet. He was extremely pleased by their presence, for he had seen them save his life from the hands of the servants of Yamaraj. Yeah, wow. He was witnessing all of this. He was hearing the arguments by the Yamadutas, and he was also hearing the arguments by the Vishnudutas. And he saw the Vishnudutas win his case. Now he was free from Yamaraj's court. Commentary by Prabhupada. Vaishnavas are also Vishnudutas because they carry out the orders of Krishna. Lord Krishna is very eager for all the conditioned souls rotting in this material world to surrender to him and be saved from material pangs in this life and punishment in hellish conditions after life. A Vaishnava therefore tries to bring conditioned souls to their senses. Those who are fortunate, like Jamil, are saved by the Vishnudutas or Vaishnavas, and thus they return back home, back to Godhead. Whoa. There's the sum and substance of preaching, especially in this Sankirtan movement. Vaishnavas are also Vishnudutas, and they are releasing the conditioned souls from having to go to Yamaraj's court by giving them the holy name, devotional service. Brings them to their senses. Vaishnavas are also Vishnudutas, carrying out the orders of Krishna. Oh, that's wonderful. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada is a Vishnuduta. Text 23. O sinless Maharaj Parikshit, the order carriers of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Vishnudutas, saw that Ajamil was attempting to say something, and thus they suddenly disappeared from his presence. Ajamil was attempting to say something. Wonder what Ajamil was getting ready to say and why they suddenly disappeared. Who was it that happened to? Someone was meditating and meditating and meditating, and then the Lord was pleased by their meditation, appeared before them. And then immediately disappeared, and that they would not be able to see them again in that lifetime. One of the great devotees that happened to, he took up the chanting very seriously. I don't know who that was. But it's interesting, right? He was going to offer prayers perhaps. Why didn't they stay? So they could hear his prayers. I wonder what he was going to say. Of course, he may not have been qualified to say anything at that point, except, thank you. But there's a commentary that Prabhupada says, the Shastras say, for persons who are papista, very sinful, and durachara, misbehaved or very unclean in their habits, who are against the existence of God, who disrespect Vaishnavas and Brahmins, who eat anything and everything, untimely death is sure. It is said that in Kali Yuga one has a maximum lifetime of 100 years. But as people become degraded, the duration of their lives decreases. Because Ajamil was now free from all sinful reactions, his lifetime was extended. even though he was to have died immediately. That's an interesting point. One's lifespan is shortened by sinful activities. But here we see that Ajamil's lifespan was extended because he was now free from all sinful reactions, even though he was supposed to have died at that point. When the Vishnu-dutas saw Ajamil trying to say something to them, they disappeared to give him a chance to glorify the Supreme Lord. Since all his sinful reactions had been vanquished, he was now prepared to glorify the Lord. Indeed, one cannot glorify the Lord unless one is completely free from all sinful activities. This is confirmed by Krishna himself in Bhagavad Gita. Yesham tvanta gatam papam jnanam punya karmanam te dvanva mohav nirmukta bhajante mam dridhavrata. Persons who have acted piously in previous lives and in this life, whose sinful actions are completely eradicated, and who are freed from the duality of delusion, engage themselves in my service with determination. The Vishnu-dutas made Ajamil aware of devotional service so that he might immediately become fit to return home back to Godhead. To increase his eagerness to glorify the Lord, they disappeared so that he would feel separation in their absence. In the mode of separation, glorification of the Lord is very intense. So there we have it. That was why they disappeared. And that's why Krishna disappears sometimes. We know that from the pastimes with the gopis and the residents of Vrindavan. Mother Yasoda and Nanda, they also experienced intense separation. The glorification of the Lord, remembering intensely, glorifying. So, Ajamil got the royal treatment here. He got a little taste, and then now he gets to feel the separation. Text 24-25. After hearing discourses between the Yamadutas and Vishnu-dutas, Ajamil could understand that religious principles that act under the three modes of material nature. These principles are mentioned in the three Vedas. He could also understand the transcendental religious principles which are above the modes of material nature and which concern the relationship between the living being and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Furthermore, Ajamil heard glorification of the name, fame, qualities, and pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He thus became a perfectly pure devotee. He could then remember his past sinful activities, which he greatly regretted having performed. Wow. So, we see, simply by hearing, but hearing, how was he hearing? He was hearing from the potent source. He was hearing from the Vishnu-dutas. He was hearing from the pure Vaishnavas, the pure devotees, the actual pure servants of the Lord. And just by that hearing, he became a pure devotee, by hearing. He understood everything. He understood the religious principles that act under the three modes of material nature and that are mentioned in the Vedas. He understood transcendental religious principles which are above the modes of nature and which concern the relationship between the living being and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He heard glorification of the name, fame, qualities, and pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And became a pure devotee, just by hearing. Prabhupada's commentary. In Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna told Arjuna, Trigunya Vasaya Veda, Nistrigunya Bhavarjuna, Nirbandva Nityasatvasto, Niryoga Shema Atmavan. The Vedas mainly deal with the subject of the three modes of material nature. Rise above these modes, O Arjuna. Be transcendental to all of them. Be free from all dualities, from all anxieties for gain and safety, and be established in the self. Vedic principles certainly prescribe a gradual process for rising to the spiritual platform. But if one remains attached to Vedic principles, there's no chance of being elevated to spiritual life. Krishna therefore advised Arjuna to perform devotional service, which is the process of transcendental religion. The transcendental position of devotional service is also confirmed in Bhagavatam. Savai pumsam paro dharma yato bhaktir adhotsaje. Bhakti, devotional service, is paro dharma, transcendental dharma. It is not material dharma. People generally think that religion should be pursued for material profit. This may be suitable for persons interested in material life, but one who is interested in spiritual life should be attached to parodharma, the religious principles by which one becomes a devotee of the Supreme Lord, the Yato Bhaktir Adhotsaje. The Bhagavat religion teaches that the Lord and the living entity are eternally related, and that the duty of the living entity is to surrender to the Lord. When one is situated on the platform of devotional service, one is freed from impediments and completely satisfied. Ahaituki pratyataya yatma suprasidati. Having been elevated to that platform, Ajamil began to lament for his past material activities and to glorify the name, fame, form, and pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yeah, so Ajamil is the person that is, we're seeing how this really works. He is the living example of what this means. That there is, how there's a difference between material religion and spiritual religion. This was something that Ajamil was enlightened by hearing the discourses between the Yamadutas and the Vishnudutas, and the super excellence of the transcendental religion, which deals with the relationship of the living entity with the Lord through loving service. The other religious principles are there for the gradual development, the gradual progress of the living entities up through the lower modes into the higher modes. They help the living entity to become free from sinful reactions, but they don't bring the person to the point of reawakening and reviving their original relationship with the Supreme Lord, the personality of Godhead. That always comes through a devotee of the Lord. And for Ajamil, it came through the Vishnudutas. They were his spiritual masters, his first spiritual masters. It's the association of the pure devotee is so potent like that he could understand the difference. Obviously, he had no respect for material religion because he spent his life in sinful activity and with the prostitute and lying and stealing and cheating. He had no respect for the material religion. He had no respect for that whatsoever. And evidently he had no information of transcendental religion. And now he's seeing how powerful the transcendental religion is. Bhakti. And that he was performing bhakti without even knowing it, and how powerful it was, just like the fire acts, whether someone knows what fire can do or they don't know what fire can do. The fire knows what it can do. Text 26. Ajamil said, "Alas, being a servant of my senses, how degraded I became. I fell down from my position as a duly qualified Brahmin, begot children in the womb of a prostitute." Prabhupada's commentary. The men of the higher classes, Brahmin, Kshatriyas, and Vaishyas, do not beget children in the wombs of lower class women. Therefore, the custom in Vedic society is to examine the horoscopes of a girl and boy being considered for marriage to see whether their combination is suitable. Vedic astrology reveals whether one has been born in the Vipravarna, Kshatriyavarna, Vaishyavarna, or Sudravarna, according to the three qualities of material nature. This must be examined because a marriage between a boy of the Vipravarna and a girl of the Sudravarna is incompatible. Married life would be miserable for both husband and wife. Consequently, a boy should marry a girl of the same category. Of course, this is trigunya, a material calculation according to the Vedas. But if the boy and girl are devotees, there need be no such considerations. A devotee is transcendental. Therefore, in a marriage between devotees, a boy and a girl form a very happy combination. So that's a practical application of the difference between the material consideration and the spiritual consideration. In something like marriage, on the material platform, for those not engaged in bhakti yoga, it was pretty important to make sure the qualities of the boy and the girl are compatible. Why? Because they're going to be engaging in a lot of sense gratification. And if their idea of what satisfies their senses isn't on the same wavelength, they're going to be pretty unhappy. If the boy's a Brahmin and he likes nice, clean food, maybe not even so much cooked stuff, lots of fruits, fresh fruits, raw vegetables, and the girl is coming from a lower class, she likes old, stale things, too spicy, nasty stuff, then how are they going to sit down and enjoy a meal together? Because their idea of what satisfies their senses is going to be very different. Not just foods, but everything. All their activities, how they keep the house, what they wear, who their friends are. It's going to be terrible. So that's why these horoscopes are done, to see that they're on pretty much the same mode of life, directed primarily by basically the same mode, so that their activities can be a little synchronized and won't be too miserable. But for devotees, there's no problem, because they like Krishna Prashanam. They like to hear bhajans and kirtans. They like to go to temples, chant and dance for the deities. And they like to raise their children in Krishna consciousness. So it's a whole different story there. The transcendental senses in connection with Krishna. So there's no need to consider this horoscope thing. The compatibility lies in serving Krishna together, not in being directed by the modes of nature together. 27. At least that's the idea. We do the best with our practical applications, but that's for devotees who are inclined, and most devotees will be, to take up family life. Alas, all condemnation upon me. I acted so sinfully. I degraded my family tradition, Indeed, I gave up my chaste and beautiful young wife to have sex, intercourse with a fallen prostitute, accustomed to drinking wine. Ugh, all contamination upon me, condemnation upon me. So, he's not within the modes of material nature now. As a Brahmin, he was in the mode of goodness, and it wasn't satisfying his sensual desires. So he slipped down into the modes of passion and ignorance, drawn by his senses. But now he's not mode of goodness, mode of passion, or mode of ignorance. He's transcendental, and he's looking back and seeing how he was controlled by the modes of material nature, and he's disgusted. Commentary. This is the mentality of one who's becoming a pure devotee. When one's elevated to the platform of devotional service by the grace of the Lord and the spiritual master, one first regrets his past sinful activities. This helps one advance in spiritual life. The Vishnudutas had given Ajamil the chance to become a pure devotee, and the duty of a pure devotee is to regret his past sinful activities in illicit sex, intoxication, meat eating, and gambling. Not only should one give up his past bad habits, but he must always regret his past sinful acts. This is the habit, this is the standard of pure devotion. Yeah, so if we remain regretful, then that's going to help inoculate us from being tempted at any point, because being in contact with the material energy, no one should ever think that, oh, now I've conquered, I'm okay, I don't have to worry. That's right when the Maya comes in. What is it? Pride goeth before a fall. That's what that means. Oh, now I have, no. It doesn't work like that. As long as we're in contact with the material energy, we have to be constantly vigilant. And part of that vigilance is in remembering how foolish we have been in the past, how bewildered we have become, and how much under the modes of material nature we've slipped. So this is Prabhupada saying that this is actually very helpful. See, not only should one give up past bad habits, but he must always regret his past sinful acts. This is the standard of pure devotion. Yeah. Certain amount of tolerance required. A lot of tolerance is required. Tendency is we don't even want to think about our past sinful activities. But the standard of pure devotion is that we think about them and we regret our sinful acts. You can see from the songs of the Vaishnavas like Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So he's singing about, I'm so fallen, and I did this and that, and I'm always thinking about this and the other thing. And he's regretting. Some of his songs are filled with regret over material condition, although we understand and we know that he is a pure devotee. So why is he doing that? Because that's the standard of pure devotion. Prabhupada's telling us here. That's the standard of pure devotion, is we live with that regret, and that helps us advance spiritual life. Text 28. My father and mother were old, had no other son or friend to look after them. Because I did not take care of them, they lived with great difficulty. Alas, an abominable lower-class man, I ungratefully left them in that condition. Yeah, thinking about sex with the prostitute was disgusting, but thinking about ungratefulness for old parents, that's painful. Very painful. Can only surmise that at this point Ajamil was crying. Prabhupada's commentary. According to Vedic civilization, everyone has the responsibility for taking care of Brahmins, old men, women, children, and cows. This is the duty of everyone, especially an upper-class person. Because of his association with a prostitute, Ajamil abandoned all his duties. Regretting this, Ajamil now considered himself quite fallen. Yeah, these classes of human of living entities are very helpless, and they're really Brahmins. They don't make their living. They live whatever comes their way. They live by charity. They don't work for money. They're not profit motivated. They study the scripture and they teach from scripture the goal of life. They serve in the temples, the deities, and they keep the religious and spiritual practices of the culture intact. They're the guardians, the guides, the heads for what should be done, what shouldn't be done. They're the advisors, the natural advisors. And they're pretty much helpless. They don't have big bank accounts. So the Brahmin, whatever they get, they spend right away. For Krishna, real Brahmins. They're completely dependent on the Vaishyas and the Kshatriyas for their maintenance. And they're not indulging in all kinds of sense gratification. They're very austere and clean. Their time is spent in meditation and prayer. And another class, old men. Old men, old women, very helpless. They can hardly perform the functions necessary for maintaining their own bodies, what to speak of doing anything else. The body is breaking down. They can't think straight. They have a lot of deterioration in the muscles and in the bones. And they need to be cleaned up after. They become incontinent. They can't hold their bowels or their urine. They can't eat properly, their teeth and their eyes. These are the conditions of old age. And yet the person is there inside this body which is falling apart. And they need to be helped. They need to be, just even for maintaining their own physical needs. They can't do anything for themselves after a while. Can't see properly, can't hear properly. And yet the spirit soul is there and this body deteriorating. So they have to be cared for so that the transition that they make is peaceful. They're not too much miserable, and just too much disturbed or feeling unloved or uncared for. They have what they need to be able to stay clean and have some food to get ready for the transition out of the body. And women need protection. Women are very vulnerable. It's said that a young man at any age, really, a man, can travel around the world and pretty much he won't be harassed. But a woman who tried to travel around the world alone is very vulnerable to be overpowered and taken advantage of in different ways. So women need protection always. because also they produce the children. And they tend to be very gentle and in different ways, more nurturing, and not so able to defend and protect, and more like they were nurturing and mothering and things like this. They need to be protected. And children, obviously, they don't know what they're doing. They're just little balls of energy. They need to be protected with education and guidance, as well as their needs for food and shelter, like this, and cows. Yep, the cows, they're part of the family. Cows and bulls are the natural mothers and fathers for the human society. The cow is giving her milk, and she produces more than her calf could ever use. If her calf drank all the milk, it would get sick. So why is she producing all that milk? It's for her service to human society. It's to give that nice food, nourishing food for the human beings, making to cheese and yogurt and butter and ghee and Simply Wonderfuls and ladus and lagdus and curd and para and burfi. Yes, this is the cow. Needs to be protected. You don't see wild cows. They don't tend to do very well, wild cows. This is the duty of everyone, yes, to protect these classes. But Ajamil, because he was preoccupied with trying to satisfy a prostitute for his degraded sense enjoyment, he abandoned all the duties. He just became absorbed in this illicit sex with the prostitute. That's all he could think of. He was blinded by this. Ajamil now considers himself quite fallen. And rightly so.